You're listening to the Residential Movement, where the focus is on making in-home dental care normal instead of novel or niche. I'm your host, Dr. Ashley Robinson, a house call dentist with a lot of passion for reaching patients who are best served in their home or residence. I'm here to encourage, equip, and empower dentists like you to begin offering in-home dental services for patients who cannot get to the office, while also enjoying a more balanced work life. We discuss everything from dentistry, business, ethics, mindset, and more. Listen in to learn how you can become a part of the residential movement.
Are you a fan of TED Talks? They can be great. I used to watch them a lot more than I currently do, so I'm more familiar with the older TED Talks. One of my favorites is Meg Jay's talk called 20 is not the new 30. Definitely check that one out. But another favorite one of mine is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. During his talk, Simon Sinek says over and over again that people don't care about what you do. They care about why you do it. Why am I mentioning Simon Sinek's talk today? Well, lately I've been getting a lot of questions that include the word why. Usually questions I get begin with the word how. How do you do this procedure? How do you find this piece of equipment? Etc. But recently, maybe because there's some wild political things going on right now and people have this aggressive energy, I've been receiving a lot of assertive and sometimes even impolite questions in my email about why I do things the way that I do. And to be fair, I don't operate like most. I have a lot of interests and opinions that are unpopular. Plus, I'm making the choice to put this little show on the internet, so I know I should be prepared for all of the challenging questions asking why. Respectful candor is my preferred method of interacting, but I realize that's not an opinion shared by everyone. For the record, I do appreciate challenges. I am not a conflict avoidant person. I think there's a lot of value to be had in debate, and I enjoy partaking. I've been called intense, and I've been called polarizing. I take zero offense to either description and actually view them as pretty accurate and sometimes complimentary. So I want to take the opportunity to answer some of these questions I've gotten lately directly here on the podcast with you. Let's begin with this two-part question. Why do you really offer house calls? Is it because they're easier? Well, I really offer house calls to provide access to care to people in my community who cannot get out of the house. Before I started offering house calls, there were 0 house call dentists in my region. There are some contracted dentists who visit senior living communities to help keep the resident compliant with New York state law, but nobody was going into private homes and doing detailed personalized care for patients. So the short answer is because there's a huge unmet need in my community. The deeper why of mine could be that I noticed this need during my hospital-based residency when we discharge patients and we would say, follow up with your dentist, and we would know that they physically couldn't go to an office. I genuinely wondered, how would they follow up? And during that same year of my residency, my own sister, who uses a wheelchair, almost fell during her dental appointment trying to transfer out of her chair into the dental chair. So I offer house calls because I noticed a genuine unmet need and thought that I could help. This is a side note. If you haven't yet, I really want to encourage you to listen to the very first episode of the Residential Movement podcast. In that episode, I explain that the world needs in-home dental care. I bring up the fact that there are 4 million American adults who would describe themselves as homebound, and that doesn't even include children with those same conditions. So the stats say that millions of Americans need in-home dental care, and that's why I do this podcast. I want to assure you that there is a career to be had in house call dentistry. I think that answers the first part of this question. The second part of this question kind of implies that house call dentistry was easier. Well, easier than what exactly? I think this is related to a similar question from another person who asked me, why did you choose an easy career that doesn't make you use your hand skills? So here's my answer. Patients who require dental house calls are generally not the picture of health. They usually don't have a lot of aesthetic demands and aren't looking to have complex surgery done. This means that a lot of the work I do is disease control, routine healthcare, dentures, extractions, restorations, etc. To be clear, these procedures do require hand skills, but sure, I'll admit I'm not doing molar endo or sinus lifts. I can concede that the procedures are simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. Losing weight simply requires burning more than you consume. That doesn't make it easy. If it were easy, we'd be much more fit as a society. House calls aren't easy. The procedures are simple, but they require a lot of effort. Effort to pack, drive, set up, clean up, but also the effort of behaviorally managing patients with cognitive impairments and dealing with their family members too. It also takes effort to physically bend awkwardly sometimes for access since your patients can't always move. So I'd never say this is easy. There's nothing wrong with wanting an easy career, by the way, but that's not my style, and I wouldn't tell a house call dentist or any dentist that their career is easy. This brings me to my next question. I was recently asked, If you think house call dentistry is such a great career, why do you also work chairside sometimes? This was in response to a picture I posted of myself inside a dental office. If you listened to the last episode of this podcast, you heard that I encourage people to do house calls part-time too. You could absolutely offer them full-time, but I know that a lot of dentists won't. They want to treat their families and friends, they like having an office, and so for whatever their own reasons are, they're not going to abandon chairside dentistry altogether. And that's okay. They can still help address the unmet needs of patients who are homebound when they're not at the office. Them working part-time doing house calls is better than nothing. But about me specifically, I mentioned this in my previous answer, I do acknowledge that certain skills don't get practiced during house calls, so if you care to maintain certain clinical skills, make sure you continue to practice those elsewhere. For example, I love oral surgery. Extractions are my jam. And yes, I can do these during house calls, but I'm very careful with case selection, which means I only end up doing simple extractions in the home. For the really fun surgical stuff, I have to occasionally pick up per diem shifts at the urgent dental center in my area. This is a place where people show up in pain and they can get that pain addressed immediately. I also find that work very satisfying, so I can choose to spend a 3-hour shift there twice a month to stay sharp on extractions. That's my choice. Another lovely question was, why don't you believe in yourself enough to run a real practice? My response is this. I believe I can do anything that I commit to doing, including running a brick-and-mortar dental practice. I know I could do it. It isn't that I don't believe that I could. It's that I do not want to. I don't want the debt, the responsibility of the real estate, the headaches of managing people, the overhead, the pace of a day in the office. I'm just not interested in doing that. Plus, I wouldn't be able to work with my ideal patients. Could I do it while prioritizing my family and upholding other responsibilities? Not sure. Either way, I haven't tried and I won't be taking on additional responsibility and potentially making myself very unhappy to prove a point. Many young dentists don't want to own a brick-and-mortar practice either. House call practice ownership is simpler and more appealing to a lot of young dentists, not just me. This next question was actually asked with the right spirit, I think. I appreciate this. Why do you encourage self-employment for house call dentists? Don't you think they could be done by an institution or group or something? Well, first, there's something very empowering about self-employment. You realize that you alone are capable of providing something of value to the community and supporting your family. There's something super liberating about that. No wonder most dentists historically have been self-employed. Too many dentists today are beholden to the insurance companies or their boss or their institution, and this ultimately doesn't benefit patients. When patients and dentists work directly with one another without middlemen, that's where the magic happens. That being said, I did not graduate dental school and set out to be self-employed. I wanted to work with underserved patients. I assumed I'd be an employee at an FQHC, which is how my career began. I really like the camaraderie of mission-filled institutions, if I'm being honest. I really like that about working at the dental school now, too. I just realized that if I were going to do house calls, I basically had to be self-employed for reasons I'm about to delve into. So about these institutions or groups, it isn't that I don't want them to offer house calls, I just know that they won't. I'd love to be wrong about this, but a house call model, in order to be effective and treat patients well, is necessarily inefficient. Groups have a lot of overhead, especially administrative overhead, and they need to transact as much and as quickly as possible. I'm not saying that these groups are always efficient, but I know that house calls are way too inefficient for them. I just don't see them taking on house calls anytime soon. The exceptions are some nonprofit clinical organizations, but even those are hard because, again, the doctor can't just worry about the patients. They also have to worry about the board and the people who are funding the grants. And ironically, institutions who offer grants to nonprofit dental organizations are groups like dental insurance companies who don't cover house calls in the first place. Honestly, I'd love to be proven wrong here, and I really welcome groups, insurance companies, and nonprofits to start offering house calls or incentivizing house calls somehow. In the meantime, I believe independent dentists will have to fill this need. Another question I was asked was, if you care so much about working with the underserved, why don't you take insurance? Short answer, reimbursement is too low for a sustainable house call practice. House call practices are so low volume that in order to be sustainable, they have to be fee-for-service and have relatively high fees. Someday, if insurance companies reimburse adequately for house calls and the extra time of travel and everything, which maybe they will, then we can have that discussion in the future. But who knows when that'll happen. Next, why are you teaching if there's such a demand for house calls? This long email had some nasty implications in it. For starters, I cannot provide direct care 24/7. And as long as I'm going to have other interests outside of my clinical practice, as you likely do, why shouldn't I spend that time teaching? I love lecturing. I love teaching. It's fun for me. I teach for the same reason that I'm hosting this podcast. The next generation of doctors needs to be prepared to treat older adult patients or patients with special needs. I want other people to know that they can have a career that focuses on people who are underserved. I never knew about house call dentistry when I was in school. My students, however, will have the advantage of knowing and potentially pursuing this field or similar fields. And finally, I was debating whether or not I should even answer this question, but it was out there this month, so here we go. If you really want to help people get started in this field, why do you charge for Dental House Call Practice Academy, coaching, and office hours? To me, that question is like asking a dentist, if you really want me to be out of pain, why would you charge for my extraction or root canal? I personally have struggled with money mindset issues in the past, and I'm still working through them, but I'm nearly on the other side, so here's my answer. To be clear, I really do want to help dentists get started in this field. That's why I've made this podcast for years. But I am not independently wealthy, nor am I sponsored by corporate sponsors for intentional reasons that we can talk about later. I'm a dentist just like all of you, but I do have a unique experience and unique offers. Dental House Call Practice Academy, DHCPA, is the course I built to help take dentists step by step through the process of building a dental house call practice. It's the course I wish I had at my disposal when I was getting started. It covers everything from foundational decisions with business entities and insurance, all through shopping and then even finding your first patient. It's available for dentists to purchase and take at their own pace as they build their house call practices. When I was getting started, I made a lot of mistakes, so I want to help people avoid those mistakes. And by the way, those mistakes cost me a heck of a lot more time and money than Dental House Call Practice Academy would cost anybody. So DHCPA is a time and money saver, and students have been very happy and see the value in the purchase. But if you're not interested in investing in DHCPA, that's okay. I have free resources available at residentialmovement.com too. And finally, I charge for office hours and coaching because they consume a lot of my time, and time is finite. Like you, I have a family and a career, and I don't have endless time. In order for me to be able to continue to help people beginning their career in house call dentistry, I have to charge for these things. I can't just be endlessly available to anyone for free, and my clients totally understand that. I'm sharing answers to these questions here today because if one person has them, it's likely other people do too. I always want to be open and honest with you on this show, and I welcome the questions. It's important to me that you know why I do what I do. I've done episodes on the podcast about remembering your why during challenges, and there's even an exercise in Dental House Call Practice Academy about finding the why behind your practice. Asking questions is important, and understanding why is important. Fun fact, I made my LinkedIn profile description years ago, and I've never changed it. Even as my jobs and roles in my career have changed over time, my description on LinkedIn has said the same thing. It reads, I work to improve access to care. That's always been true. The way I spend my time and my roles have changed over time, but my personal mission has remained the same. Access. That's why I do what I do. I hope that answering some of these why questions offered some clarity to you and helped you realize that you can become a house call dentist. Even if you teach, even if you work chairside, even if you have a family, you can be a house call dentist. Your future patients will really benefit. Please, please, please always feel free to ask me anything. Email me at hello@residentialmovement.com. Thank you for listening today. I really appreciate you.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Residential Movement. If you like what you heard today, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you know someone who could benefit from this information, please share this with them. All of these actions help fuel the residential movement. Visit residentialmovement.com for show notes and for access to any links referenced in this episode. Thanks again for listening, Doc. Keep up the good work.